I want to talk to you about something that's popularly sort of on social media and come to be known as the Rajan list. And this was the list of willful defaulters that you sent to the Prime Minister's office. Have you heard from the government on this at all? And was there a recommended course of action along with the list of names that you suggested to the government?
No, look, I think the government started sort of on this process. I don't know where it is. I think the intent was really in order to bring down the list of frauds. This was not about willful defaulters, it was about frauds. In order to bring down frauds and make it less of a lucrative enterprise for both the people who sometimes are associated within the banks, but also the people outside who are defrauding the banks, we have to bring some of these guys to book and say, here is the penalty of actually defrauding the public sector system. And unfortunately, too many of the big players have gotten away. And, we spend years in litigation.
Were those who have gotten away part of the list?
I think it was a broad list in terms of value. Here are the biggest frauds, and it would be useful for us to proceed against these people and essentially bring them to book.
Do you think that anything has changed materially to ensure that we don't see this happen again?
Well, I do think...
Because the RBI data doesn't seem to suggest so.
Well, certainly when I was there, I was worried at the growing sort of amounts of the frauds. And unless there is punishment for crime, there is no reason for the crime to come down. If you can walk away with impunity, I think it just encourages more. So we do need to bring people to book. Again, carefully, not subjecting the whole system to harassment. But where there is, and this is why I said focusing on the large value crimes, it is important to invest resources in bringing them back into the country and letting them face the full weight of the law.
You talked about jobs, and there is this debate on job creation. There is no access to conclusive data from the government so far, whether it's the NSSO data or the Labour Department's data. But anecdotally, the government believes that more jobs have been created and that this pessimism around jobs is overdone. How do you read the job situation?
Well, look, I do think that we need better data. I also do think that wherever we have data, we should not suppress the data. We should let people judge what the data are about.
You believe the data is being suppressed?
No, my worry is that, sometimes when the data are not supportive, we tend to delay the release, we tend to, downplay the quality of the data, etc., etc. Come on, let it all come out, but focus on creating new levels of new sources of data, and certainly on employment. That is something we've been debating for a long time. We should move post-haste on that. Now, anecdotally, you can make any case you want. I mean, when 25 million people apply for 90,000 jobs, is that saying that we are oversupplied with jobs? My guess is it's saying that at least at a minimum, we're not oversupplied with the kind of jobs that provide government benefits and so on. People seem to find that very attractive. And that's a worry, because these are not great government jobs. These are modest railway jobs for which we have 25 million people applying. My sense is that we need to absorb enormous amounts from agriculture because, the size of agricultural holdings are falling, productivity is low, the incomes they make there are really quite small. We need to create jobs in rural areas. We need to create jobs for people leaving agriculture. And that involves a tremendous rethinking of where we've been going. It involves ultimately a second generation of reforms which enlists agriculture in the growth process, but also creates jobs for those leaving agriculture.
Since you're talking about the next generation of reforms, and you did present a paper along with 13 other economists on what India needs to do to be able to generate 8% plus kind of growth rates, what would you say, given the kind of political mandate that this government enjoys, what would you say have been the big hits and the misses? And even the self-inflicted wounds, perhaps?
Well, look, I've spoken enough about that. Let me say that I think the government has creditably brought in the bankruptcy code. We need to make sure that it works by Certainly, that first generation of large companies that went into bankruptcy, that has to end in finite time, not be constantly appealed. I think there's a process of learning, and hopefully that will reduce the time for future cases rather than actually increase it. Unfortunately, for our previous attempts at bringing corporate bankruptcy in, the bankrupt have actually found ways to game the system, and we should make sure that doesn't happen once again. I think that's been a good development. I think GST, despite the glitches in the rollout, is something the country needs in the longer run. It's something that we have to fully operationalize.
Convergence to a three-rate structure?
Eventually, I think we need to. Look, I have no problem with the fact that initially you have a more complicated structure, but we need to simplify. We need to bring it down to as few rates as we can. I think that's been another win. I think where we need more work, certainly, we have done very little on making the labor laws more friendly towards contract workers who don't have really a long-term future in companies, but also giving companies more flexibility to grow into really big producers of the kind we see in China. This is something that, for example, Arvind Panagaria was very strong about, but we haven't done very much. Another place where I think we have done little is on land acquisition. One of the biggest stumbling blocks in infrastructure is how we acquire land. Can we learn from the best practices across the country and bring in a humane but effective and fast land acquisition system? That's something I think the next administration, whoever it is, will have to think strongly about.
Bank consolidation, and we've seen a recent sort of merger of three banks being announced. The criticism is that the hope was that we would actually see government holding reduce, but here now you're seeing bigger government-owned banks. What would be the lesson as far as consolidation is concerned for the next government? Well, more of this kind of consolidation?
Well, I think we have an experiment underway. Whatever the rationale behind the experiment, we should see it play out. There's no point sort of undoing. Let's see what happens with the Bank of Baroda merger with Dena and Vijaya, and see if that's the way we want to go. I would also say it's time that we also experimented with, perhaps letting one of these banks loose on the private sector, becoming a private sector bank. IDBI was a bank that was considered for that.
It was a budget commitment.
Well, let's.
And now you've got LIC.
It's something to think about. Can we clean up IDBI, and then, or simultaneously, let it go into the private sector, or largely private? The big issue that we have to solve in all these cases is how do we create a governance structure that works? We've seen that there are deficiencies in the public sector bank governance structure. There are also deficiencies in the private bank governance structure. So how do we create a governance structure that is more independent from the government, but actually runs the bank in an effective way? That's something to think about.
There's been a lot of speculation that you're being courted by various political parties, and if this Mahagathbandhan were to come to some sort of hope at being in power, that they might even consider you as finance minister. Is that something that you might even consider?
It's all speculation, but really what number of us have been trying to do is put ideas into the system. Some of them are well-worn ideas, but I think we really need to think about how we take our country forward, that we are reaching the point where the old pace of growth is not enough. We need a new sort of revival, reinvigoration of growth. And what are the reforms that we need to do, the second or third set of reforms, to put this country on that growth path? That's something we need to think about very carefully.
So are these political parties reaching out to you for ideas and for counsel?
I talk with political leaders all the time.
Have you spoken with Rahul Gandhi recently?
I have spoken with Rahul Gandhi. Chandrababu Naidu and I were supposed to be on a panel here, so we talk with. I talk with whoever wants to talk to me. I spoke with Mr. Jaitley just 2 or 3 weeks ago.
But would you consider politics?
Look, I'm not a politician. I've said that many times. I have. One of the important things in life is to know what your comparative advantage is. I'm a technocrat, I'm an academic. Those are the two areas which I know about.
And if you were called back to a position in India?
A hypothetical question. I don't answer that, but I really want us to think very carefully about what the next set of reforms need to be to take us forward.
And the biggest one that you would want to focus on?
Well, look, I think I've always said there's no magic bullet, that we have to do a whole bunch of things. And so some of the things we talked about, how do we improve the land acquisition process? How do we have a taxation system that generates adequate revenues? We have some new schemes, how do we work them out to make sure that the revenue collection is appropriate? Those are all things we need to think about.
Raghuram Rajan, always a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us here in Davos. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, with that, it is time for us to hand it back to you. That was the former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan in conversation with us here in Davos.